All right, welcome to this brand new chapter where we're going to discuss responsive considerations when working with GSAP. And that's something we haven't touched on. We really haven't touched on anything mobile yet in this course, but we're going to need to because we are going to build a full project here at the end. And in doing so, we're going to understand how to make custom adjustments to our animations within GreenSock Animation Platform for mobile versus tablet versus desktop. And they provide you with something called matchMedia, and that's a GSAP thing. So if you recall lessons and lessons ago, we have this project right here where we were working with this split type library to create something cool like this. Now I just chose this one randomly. It's not really pertinent to any real world use cases, but I did want to show you if, for instance, maybe on mobile you don't want to have this animation, then how do you do that? So that's what we're going to look at. So if you open up this before project for this particular lesson, you're going to see the same exact lesson code that we had for that project. And so we're going to modify this in a couple different ways. And I'm going to show you two different techniques. The one is the less efficient, and then we'll go to the more efficient way to do things. So the first thing that you want to make sure is, fortunately with matchMedia, you don't have to import any extra libraries. So the first thing that we're going to do is first, I actually don't want to have this to thing. I want to keep the text there so that when it comes in, it just stays. And it does the same exact thing for mobile as well. And I should note, I'm sorry I'm talking a lot, I should note that depending on how you structure, specifically in relation to the units you're using, the CSS units, a lot of times, you should try to strive for your animations to work everywhere. That way you don't have to do these conditional variables to check if they're on desktop or mobile. For instance, like this being centered, or perhaps you're trying to scale something out. You want to use flexible units. You don't want to use fixed units like pixels. So if you move something 400 or 1,000 pixels over, it might work well on desktop, but not necessarily on mobile because you don't have that much screen real estate. So you want to use viewport units, you want to use percentage units as much as possible. Okay, we want to define a variable that will hold all of the data that has to do with what type of device a person's on in terms of the device width. So what we would do is say let, and then a common naming for this, you can name it whatever you want, of course. We're going to say for matchMedia equals gsap.matchMedia, camel case. All right, so that's the first thing that we want to define up here. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to keep this stuff here. And then inside of here, this code right here, we can ignore the smooth scroll for this example, so we can just push it off screen. We want to go ahead and just like we can use, we can define a timeline variable like let_tl equals gsap.timeline, and then we can use the timeline to have multiple calls to like to's or from to's. Same thing with the variable that we've defined. So here's how this works. We're going to say dot_add. Let's zoom up just a bit, and we're going to say in the first parameter min width, and if you have any understanding of CSS, which you should, this is going to look a little similar to the media queries. We're going to say 600 pixels. So what this will mean is, and before I describe it, let's go ahead and finish this line right here. All right, so what we want to do is take this code and we want to stick it right in there. Now what this is saying, let's get this all tabbed up, is essentially it is saying, if this code right here is being ran on a device that has a minimum width of 600 pixels, then execute this code. This means that this will work for desktop. It will not work for a small device or a browser that is less than 600 pixels. So you won't see any animation. All right, so let's go ahead and just save this and let's see what happens. So if I refresh, we don't see a thing. And the reason we don't see the type is because by default, we have set opacity to 0, okay? Now if we expand it, look at that. Now if I hit F12 and we go back a little bit smaller, but now you can at least see right up here, it's gonna look really small on your screen. When you drag it out, you'll see we're getting to 550 pixels, 560, 70, 80, 90, 600. right there. So if I refresh here, it'll work, but if I come back here to like less than 600, like 589, refresh, we see nothing. Okay, so now that we have that set, okay, great, we can do that. Let's say, for instance, we wanted to add another one. So let's come out down here, and we're gonna say, this time we'll use max width, and we'll say 599 pixels. So as you would imagine, this is basically anything that is less than 600 pixels or 599 pixels. In that case, what we can say is now GSAP set our H1 auto alpha 1. Let's save it, and now we can see it. So by default, when we refresh this, there's no animation. Maybe they don't want animation, or maybe you don't want to have animation for this particular element. However, for like desktop or tablets, you do want to have animation. Perfectly fine. So this is one way of doing it. However, there is something that you will run into in a more robust, complete project, and that is this. When you add all these different media queries right here through matchMedia, you're going to find that you're going to have a lot of verbose code, meaning a lot of repeating code. You want to avoid that, obviously, in any language. And so for this, we can use conditional logic. So it requires just modifying slightly our setup, and we should result in less code. Maybe not for this example, but for a more full website that has a lot of animations and interactivity, it would definitely behoove you to use that approach and this approach that I'm going to show you now. So what we'll do is just to create and separate things out here, we're going to do an index2.html, and we'll go back to our index, we'll copy all this and just paste it right here. That way we kind of have a backup of the original way, and then we can do the better way right here. So the one thing that we're going to adjust is right here. Let me zoom up. Instead of having this string right here, what we're going to do is open this up in brackets. And then what we're going to do is put in is mobile, and we're going to say max width 599 pixels. We'll put a comma. We'll put it is desktop, min width 600 pixels. Great. We're also going to pass in the context right here. So then we're going to do some destructuring, which we will refer to these as is mobile and is desktop equals context dot conditions. Okay. So just a little bit of boilerplate code that you really won't have to, mind too much, just for the initial setup, and then you kind of set it and forget it. And what we do now is this gives us the ability, instead of having to define multiple calls with add, we can delete this. We can now say something like this. So this right here, we only want this to run on the desktop version, right? This little timeline animation. So in that case, what we could say is if is desktop, just wrap it in an if statement. All right, so let's get this all tabbed back up, and let's go ahead and save that. So now, if we go back, and of course we have to make sure we're looking at index2.html. There we go. Refresh, and I must have screwed something up. Oh yes, right here I forgot a parentheses while I was typing and talking at the same time. All right, so we'll save that. Let's go make sure you're looking at index2. Let's refresh. There we go. Let's go back over here, refresh. This is under 600 pixels, so we have no animation showing. So that's just one facet of matchMedia in responsive considerations within GSAP. In the next lesson, we're going to take a look at some other considerations, such as what to do when we're handling click events and good stuff like that.